Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 9th episode of The Greats of History, the podcast where we get to know people with the epithet of the Great and try to get past the honorific and understand who they were, what they did, and why some people seem to like them so much. I am grateful that you're here. Please, if you feel I've earned it, take a moment and share the show with anyone you think might be interested. I'd be grateful for your help in spreading the word about this series. In our recent episodes, we got to know the Medes a bit better, including how they came to play a role in toppling the dread pirate Assyria, the founding of the Persian Achaemenid dynasty, and the falling out between the two, one a mighty kingdom, the other a coalition of tribes chafing under Median domination. Cyrus II just inherited the throne upon the death of his father, Cambyses I, and took over amid the specter of looming war with their rustic and brutal cousins. It's not entirely clear why the two sides started fighting in the first place. The Medes seem to have invaded Persian territory. But did the Medes invade Persia to subdue more land? Or did they do so as a response to a Persian provocation of some sort? Certainly the Persians had been deeply disaffected by the Median domineering. The most likely scenario is that the Persian rebellion was a response to a series of Median incursions into their territory conducted by the Medes as an assertion of their dominance. If this is true, there's a nice historical symmetry at play here. The Medes were less a unified people and more a loosely affiliated group of tribes until they were forced to establish central leadership to fight back against Assyrian brutality. In turn, it would seem that their own aggressive repression of a closely related people led to those same people, the Persians, into coalescing into a centrally controlled hierarchy in order to effect a more successful response to Median aggression. I don't think I'm giving anything away when I say the Medes aren't going to be on top for much longer, or at least AC ain't in charge no more. What goes around, comes around. No matter who fired the first shot, so to speak, once hostilities commenced, Cyrus found himself rallying the united clans of Persia in a full-fledged rebellion against the Medes. As a reminder, at this time, the Median kingdom was ruled by Astyages, son and successor of King Cyaxares, the same king that had teamed up with the Babylonians to overthrow the Assyrians. You may remember that Cyaxares married his daughter to Nebuchadnezzar. It was this daughter, Amytis, for whom the Hanging Gardens were built. This made Astyages and Nebuchadnezzar brothers-in-law. But while the successors of Nebuchadnezzar rose and fell with alarming frequency, bringing the Neo-Babylonians to the brink of collapse, Astyages held tight to the reins of power, consolidating that power and providing a firm and steady hand for the Median kingdom. Astyages, in turn, had married his daughter Mandane to the Persian Khan Cambyses I. This made Astyages the grandfather of the new king Cyrus. But family mattered less to Astyages than his own prestige. The uprising from the Persians could not be tolerated. Astyages was a capable and experienced ruler, in control of a powerful kingdom of hardy, tent-living warriors. He was ruthless in pursuing the consolidation of power. His southern cousins, with their cultural intermingling of the urbane Elamites, were a bit more refined, and so he thought, a little softer too. The upstart Persians didn't seem to offer too much of a threat. In responding to the Persian revolt, the Medes had all the cards. They had the more powerful army, and the fight was essentially in their home territory. Astyages smugly sent his general Harpagus marching against the upstarts to put down their revolt, and to either chasten or execute his grandson Cyrus. Harpagus was a gifted military strategist, destined to be remembered as one of the best generals of the ancient world. With his brains and the Median brawn, Cyrus was overmatched. He prepared for battle with the biggest strategic asset that he could muster, his intelligence. In about 550 BCE, the rebellion hinged on a pitched battle. Harpagus closed the gap between himself and Cyrus, and the two sides squared each other up. But rather than the commencement of a full-out attack, a shocking thing happened. Realizing that they would be much better friends than enemies, Harpagus defected to Cyrus and brought over a big portion of his army to the Persian camp for good measure. Cyrus more or less doubled his army, gained the services of the best general of the day, crippled his opponent's fighting capability, and all without the loss of a life. How on earth did that happen? The Median general Harpagus had planned for this. He had laid the groundwork for this defection in prior correspondence, having earlier secreted a letter to Cyrus promising his support and encouraging Cyrus to continue his rebellion. Cyrus gleefully accepted. It was quite a deal for him. But just why did Harpagus place a bet on the weaker party and betray his king for an upstart Persian rebel? There are some truly dreadful legends that Astyages forced Harpagus to eat his own son, whom Astyages killed, roasted, and served to his general as a punishment for a failure to heed orders. In this gruesome tale, Astyages watched Harpagus closely, looking for any hint of disaffection or disloyalty. The general had to eat his macabre meal with stoic resignation, knowing that even the slightest frown would lead to his own execution. He passed the test, but he plotted his revenge. This legend is likely nonsense. It seems more likely that the revolt had to do with Astyages' style of leadership. Rather than continue the Median tradition of loose tribal affiliations in which each tribe had a large measure of autonomy and dignity, Astyages was consolidating power and setting himself up as an Assyrian-style absolute king. This bred a lot of resentment with the Median nobility, and Harpagus was hedging his bet by fomenting revolt in the south. It was in this context that he begun his secret correspondence with the rising Persian Khan. Once he got to know his Persian pen pal, Harpagus clearly saw the shining brilliance of the young rebel. Switching from Astyages to the Persian was a win-win for Harpagus. He got out from underneath a brutal and ruthless commander and allied himself with a leader of much greater vision and essential humanity. Even as Cyrus was a younger, untested leader of a weaker power, Harpagus was taking a calculated risk on the ascendancy of Cyrus. He didn't come to the party by himself. Following their commander, a significant portion of the Median army switched sides too. Without loosing an arrow, Cyrus took on the brunt of the Median military juggernaut and turned it right back around on Astyages. Suddenly, Cyrus went from a rebel king of a smaller and weaker vassal kingdom to commanding a veteran army headed by a strategic genius. Astyages ranted and raved. Cyrus focused on the task ahead. The once lopsided contest was now much more even, and the Medes and the Persians battled for control of the empire in a series of hard-fought contests. It took a few years, but Cyrus and Harpagus slowly tilted the contest in their favor, getting the edge in these battles and methodically reducing the Median army bit by bit. In the concluding phases of the war, Cyrus's troops captured the Median capital of Ecbatana, and with it King Astyages. Oh, how the turntables! Brought before Cyrus, Astyages likely expected humiliation, or death, or both. After all, how often had the Medes emulated the savagery of the Assyrians? For pretty much all of history to this point, captured kings were either killed or ritually humiliated and often disfigured. There was no better way to seize an empire than capturing and killing or torturing its king. Cyrus, however, was just full of surprises. Maybe he held some affection for his grandfather, or maybe he was a genuinely benevolent guy, as much as such a thing was possible in the ancient Near East. Probably it was both. Cyrus didn't exactly pardon his vanquished foe, but he did spare his life and allow him to live in dignity. Sources vary about what exactly became of Astyages. In some accounts, he was welcomed as a retainer at Cyrus's court. In others, Cyrus gave his vanquished grandfather a governorship of an important province. All the sources agree that rather than execute his former adversary, Cyrus granted him clemency and continued to treat him with the respect due a man of his status. But Cyrus was not all gentle benevolence. To cement his legitimacy, Cyrus executed a Median nobleman that had been married to Astyages' daughter Amytas. Given his own connections to the Median royal family, Amytas also happened to be his aunt. This didn't stop Cyrus from taking her as a wife, and thus Cyrus became son-in-law to his own grandfather. This also meant that Mandane, who was also a daughter of Astyages, was mother to her sister's new husband, Cyrus. Thus, Mandane became mother-in-law to her own sister. All in the family, eh? If you need to go back a few seconds and listen to that, I'll understand. Royal bloodlines get really weird sometimes. And if you're wondering why Cyrus made this move, it's likely that the connection to the Median family in this manner calmed some of the tensions within the tribal structure of Median society. It was his way of entering multiple lines of nobility. Not only did Cyrus co-opt the ruling family of Media, he also appropriated the Median royal treasury, filling his coffers with gold, silver, and all sorts of wealth and luxury goods. Keep in mind, the area under Median control was huge. In one generation, the Achaemenids had coalesced all the Persian tribes into a social structure with themselves at the top. Then, by deposing the Median king and placing himself atop their political structure, Cyrus became the towering figure of the Near East, sitting atop both Persian and Median society and administering the combined territory as a huge empire. This remarkable turn of events is even more impressive when we consider that it happened in the span of about a year. At the beginning of 550 BCE, things looked grim for Cyrus as the conflict with the Astyages ramped up. By the end of the same year, he had completely upended the geopolitical order of the Near East and sat atop a truly massive kingdom. But aside from the pardoning Astyages and rearranging his household, what was to be done with the rest of Media? As he considered what to do, he could reflect on what Assyria had done to vanquish kingdoms, or what the Medes did when they, in turn, annihilated Assyria. Obliterating a vanquished foe was standard operating procedure, but Cyrus was a different kind of king. Having merged the Median and Persian kingdoms under one crown, and remember, he was half Median, half Persian, so he made a natural ruler over both people, Cyrus decreed that Medes and Persians would be fully equal. This was more than benevolent, it was savvy politics. By welcoming Medians into the fold on equal footing with the Persians, Cyrus gave the Medians incentive to support his rule. This both made him stronger and preemptively minimized the risk of a subsequent revolt. The Medes were, like the Persians, based around a hierarchical tribal system. It wasn't too difficult for Cyrus to just slide to the top of the social structure. For his part, he had little to gain by installing an oppressive regime, which would only sow the seeds of resentment and rebellion. Far better to honor his enemy and include them in the power structure. Besides, there was plenty to do and plenty of territory to govern. Cyrus surrounded himself with competent people and got to work. That said, not everyone was excited by the Persian ascendancy. All the way over on the Anatolian coast lay another kingdom of the ancient world, Lydia. Now, before you panic and think, oh no, here comes another elaborate backstory from some obscure ancient kingdom, fear not. I know I say this often, but I mean it on this one. I'll keep it quick. Lydia was a rich and ambitious kingdom that, by the time of the rise of Cyrus, occupied roughly the western third of modern Turkey. It wasn't the size of their kingdom that made them a force to be reckoned with. Their power was derived from two things, geography and economics. Geographically, the Lydians occupied the extremely fertile agricultural lands, and as we've discussed over and over, in the ancient world, agricultural productivity created enormous wealth for the kings who sat atop the hierarchy. The gentle, ambling waters of the river Meander, from which we get the modern word, kept the fields well watered. Another river, however, ensured riches of a different kind. The river Pactolus, which drained the mountainous Anatolian highlands, washed gold, lots and lots of gold, down into the waiting hands of the Lydian kings. What to do with all this precious metal? It might seem obvious to us, but the Lydians did something truly remarkable, innovative. They invented currency. Other countries had used gold as a medium of exchange, but it was the Lydians who put standardized weights and denominations, stamped the coins with official seals, and put these coins into circulation. Eventually, they had coins of both gold and silver, giving them even more ways to capitalize on their mineral wealth. This, in turn, revolutionized commerce and trade, which then made the Lydians even richer. They built or annexed magnificent cities along the Aegean Sea, including Ephesus, Miletus, and their elegant capital, Sardis. For trade, they were just across the sea from the emerging Greek city-states and had access to profitable trade routes with the Medes and the Babylonians, among others. It wasn't the largest kingdom of the ancient world, but it was comically wealthy. Money could buy a lot of things, including mercenary armies, naval ships, weapons, even corruptible ambassadors from far-off lands. Money was power, and these people had a lot of money. The other asset that the Lydians had going for them was their political alliance with the Medes. At first, the Medes had tried their hand at conquering Lydia, but the Lydians held their ground and the Medes changed tack. Forming an alliance of mutual support, the daughter of the Lydian king married the son of the Median king. That Median king was Cyaxares, the Median ruler that had teamed up with Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar to topple Assyria. The son in this marriage alliance would, in turn, inherit the Median throne. This was none other than our old friend Astyages. In time, the Lydian throne passed to the next generation, and the prince Croesus became king. When Cyaxares died, and Astyages became king of Media, by way of this complex marriage alliance, the Median and Lydian kings were now brothers-in-law. The partnership between these two great powers was multifaceted and mutually beneficial. When the Medes fell to the Persians, the Lydians wrung their hands in angst. Their powerful ally, Astyages, was now an imperial retainer of the newly ascendant Cyrus. Croesus remembered that when the Medes had displaced the Assyrians, the Medes had taken a shot at conquering Lydia. Now that they were in charge, would the Persians do the same thing? Croesus fretted about what to do. Should he wait for the new hegemon to invade or proactively attack? He posed the question to the most reliable advisor available to anyone in the ancient world, the oracle at Delphi. Croesus had lavished gifts on the oracle and was counting on wise counsel. Wrestling between the wait-and-see and preemptive strike approaches, he posed a question to the oracle. Should he attack? The oracle gave Croesus a clear answer. Do that, and you will destroy a great empire. This answer positively thrilled the Lydian king. From his bases in western Anatolia, Croesus mobilized for war, throwing his considerable cash around to build up his forces. His first move was to attack a vassal state that he thought might be tempted to switch its allegiance to Persia, using his military to subdue this vassal and reminding them not to get any ideas. This got Cyrus's attention, and he came marching west in 547 BCE to confront this belligerent. In short order, the mighty Persians joined the Lydians in battle, and Croesus was utterly defeated. Croesus burned the contested city to the ground to prevent it from becoming a Persian base and fled to his capital at Sardis. Cyrus followed hot on his heels. Outside of Cyrus, the two sides squared off against one another. Drawing from his enormous reserves, Croesus amassed a huge army. All the way back in the introduction, I confess that I find the specifics of battle descriptions kind of, dull. But I also find downright laughable some of the hyperbolic numbers of belligerents the ancient historians tally for these big contests. This is one such case, as the ancients said that Cyrus brought along 200,000 of his friends, and yet he was still outnumbered 2-1 by Croesus in his army of more than 400,000. Exaggerated though these numbers are likely to have been, both sides mustered considerable forces, and Cyrus was far from home, deep in enemy territory, and significantly outnumbered. But he had one soldier that Croesus did not, Harpagus. Remember him? He's the Median general whose defection to Cyrus tilted the balance of power and led to Cyrus's triumph over Astyages. He stood next to Cyrus and weighed up his options. The wily Mede realized that the Lydian horses, world-renowned for their strength and power, had likely never encountered camels, part of the Persian military baggage train. Harpagus suggested that Cyrus move his camels to the front of the army. Why do this? Camels aren't exactly suited to be great cavalry. They were more for transportation and logistical support than useful in battle, and certainly shouldn't sit at the vanguard at the head of a mighty army. But Harpagus understood that the camels brought one very specific advantage to the battlefield: their smell. The Lydian horses, powerful and majestic though they may have been, were unused to the scent of the strange beasts. As the Lydian cavalry charged, their horses got a whiff of the Persian camels, and the smell terrified the horses. The charge of the Lydian cavalry faltered, and once again the Persians utterly routed the Lydians. They fled behind the walls of their capital, Sardis. Cyrus, again, followed the Lydians, who settled in for a long and brutal siege. Much to their chagrin, though, the Persians just kept coming, probing for weaknesses in Sardis's defensive fortifications, and bolstered by their string of victories, the Persians built the necessary equipment, scaled the walls, poured into the city, and ended the siege after 2 short weeks. The mighty Lydian kingdom had collapsed even more quickly than the Median one had. Croesus was captured. He then realized the meaning of the oracle's prophecy about attacking Persia proactively. Do that, and you will destroy a great kingdom. Too late, he realized. The great kingdom he would destroy was his own. There is some disagreement in the ancient sources over the fate of Croesus. Some say he attempted to commit suicide. Others say that Cyrus ordered him to be burnt alive, but that a rainstorm swept in and put out the pyre just as it was being lit. But most sources agree that Cyrus, again, treated his vanquished foe with respect and, like with Astyages, either kept Croesus as an inner circle advisor or sent him to govern a key province. Personally, it seems unlikely to me that Cyrus would have changed course. If he wanted to kill his defeated foe, then he would have done so. Cyrus was not a ruthless man, at least by the standards of his day. He had benefited from his act of clemency to Astyages, Doing the same to Croesus would only smooth the integration of Lydia into the burgeoning Persian Empire and give Cyrus an important propaganda tool to simultaneously highlight his benevolence and his supremacy. Keeping their kings alive allowed a vanquished foe to feel that they were represented in the inner circle of the king's court. Croesus joined his brother-in-law Astyages as kings serving the king. Mind you, this happened just 3 years or so after the Persians knocked off the Medes. Conquering the two most powerful and wealthy kingdoms in just a few years was an incredible start for Cyrus. But conquering and ruling are two very different things. The Assyrians and the Medes, for example, were adept conquerors, but their methods of rule only led to their eventual downfall. Cyrus, a reasonable and moderate man, allowed for a measure of autonomy within his extensive dominions. For example, he granted subject people freedom of religion. He was a patient man, but patience had its limits. After he packed up and left the local administration in place, Cyrus marched for home. Some local Lydians saw their opportunity to have a last gasp at independence. They seized the considerable royal treasury and used the riches to hire another mercenary army, and revolted. It's to his credit that Cyrus didn't immediately lop off Croesus' head. While the former king had nothing to do with the revolt, leaving a deposed king alive gave rebels something to rally around. But instead of killing the king, he asked Croesus for advice. Croesus shared his thoughts, and Cyrus considered this perspective in planning his response to the Lydian rebellion. In short order, Cyrus dispatched one of his top generals to put down the revolt. When that general died in the conflict, Cyrus upped the ante. Wanting the rebellion to be crushed once and for all, he sent in the big guns, his trusted battlefield commander, Harpagus. The Mede fulfilled his objectives, breaking the Lydian revolt. But why stop there? He needed to make sure that no one in the area could stir up trouble. After all, local kingdoms could always be tempted by Lydian gold, and the rebels had used their cash reserves to buy from these and other regional players a mercenary army. Harpagus didn't want to just crush the Lydians. He needed to eliminate the entire region's ability to make war. So, with his lethal army having suppressed the Lydian revolt, Harpagus just kept going, conquering or subduing almost all the lesser kingdoms of Asia Minor. Thus, Cyrus and Harpagus parlayed the Lydian revolt into further territorial expansion. Following the example of his king, Harpagus showed great leniency towards vanquished foes, even to their leadership. Cyrus's ethic of fair treatment was permeating itself through the Persian command. As a reward for his valiant and exemplary service, Cyrus promoted Harpagus to satrap of the rich territory of Asia Minor. What's a satrap, you say? Governors in the Persian Empire were called satraps, and their territories were called satrapies. It's a nomenclature thing, but the relationship of the Persian kings to their satraps is important. These governors were invested with a lot of responsibility and autonomy. They usually commanded military units and ran the civil administration. Satraps were expected to represent the king of kings, embody the dual virtues of valor and truth-telling, administering their territories with fairness and justness. The satrap governance structure was a natural expression of the tribal-based Persians and Medians. Satrapies were, essentially, mini-kingdoms. Loyalty was a key, as any satrap had considerable resources at their disposal should they get a mind to mounting a coup. That Cyrus invested the Mede, Harpagus, with the obscenely rich satrapy founded on his conquest of Lydia tells us how much trust the king placed in his commander. For his part, Harpagus rewarded his king with loyal service and just administration. His bet on the upstart rebel all those years ago proved to be quite wise indeed. They'd each benefited from their extraordinary partnership. So, here's Cyrus. He's toppled the Medes, he vanquished the Lydians, he extended his holding to most of Asia Minor. Perhaps heeding the lesson from the reeling Babylonians, Cyrus took care not just to build an empire, but also to build the administrative state necessary to govern it. He consolidated all of his territory into a well-run, fair, and just administration, with competent leaders appointed to key posts and authorized to make important decisions as representatives of their king. This empire was getting huge, but it ran smoothly. If he'd stopped there, then we would likely have already given him the epithet of the Great. But Cyrus was just getting started. But where else to turn? Cyrus weighed up his next moves. Wasn't conquering the Near East getting kind of boring? I mean, people have been building and conquering kingdoms in Mesopotamia, the Levant, Syria, etc., all the way back to the first episode in this podcast series. What about trying his hand at something new? What about turning east? For a roughly 5-year period, from about 545 to 540 BCE, Cyrus went east, marching from one territory to the next, conquering further and further, pushing his boundaries all the way to the doorstep of India. He even crossed the Hindu Kush mountain range and shook down Indian tribes for tribute. He didn't meet with universal success. Some tribes and kingdoms fought ferociously. Usually, though, he won out. At least once, when faced with a particularly stubborn foe, he simply shrugged and just moved on to the next one. Unlike many rulers of the ancient world, both before and after, Cyrus seems to have understood that people valued their independence, and he didn't take it too personally when they opposed his attempts at conquest. He was uniquely able to see the world through his adversary's eyes, and he always seems to have conducted himself with a measure of respect for his opponents. That didn't mean that he stopped trying to conquer, though. As a result of his eastern conquests, Cyrus ballooned the Persian Empire to include lands into modern Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan. But you may have noticed, we haven't mentioned one particular old friend in a little while. I wonder what those Neo-Babylonians have been up to. When we last encountered the Babylonian Empire, they followed up their joint conquest of Assyria, along with their partners in crimes, the Medes, by enduring volatility and chaos in their kingly successions. The noble Nabonidus was surprised to find himself on the throne in or around 556 BCE. He was placed there after his son Belshazzar had engineered a coup and toppled Nabonidus' much despised predecessor. But the kingly life wasn't for Nabonidus. A few years into his reign, he left for an extended trip to the oasis town of Tama in the Arabian Peninsula, leaving Belshazzar in charge. When you coming home, Dad? I don't know when. And needless to say, they didn't have a good time then. Nabonidus came to Tamia for approximately 10 years. He seems to have worked towards the beautification of the oasis, dedicating considerable energy to communing with his favorite gods and generally ignoring what a lousy job his son was doing running the Babylonian Empire. Belshazzar might have engineered his family's ascent to the throne, but once in hand, he ignored the care and maintenance of the empire, its building, its fortifications, its people, its everything. Not to get too carried away, but the sun-baked mud bricks that so much of Babylonian building were built with don't exactly hold up well over time. Even the greatest city the world has ever known, ancient Babylon, needed a lot of upkeep. Belshazzar was not up to the task. The city, as a bit of a metaphor for the Neo-Babylonian state, fell into a sorry state of repair. The father was talented, but was disinterested and on a permanent vacation far away. The son was active and ruling from the capital, but lacked talent, wisdom, or solid judgment. In fact, when the time came, neither father nor son were prepared for Cyrus. When we first met the Persians, back toward the beginning of part 1 of this episode, I mentioned that, by virtue of being in the southern part of Mesopotamia, the Persians had been in close contact with the great civilization of Elam and its capital of Susa. In 540 BCE, Cyrus conquered the Elamites, though it's possible he really more or less just absorbed them into his burgeoning empire, another feather in his comically big cap. The Babylonians were now hemmed in on all sides. The marriage alliance between the Medes and the Babylonians had offered the latter some measure of protection from the former, but with Cyrus completely obliterating the Medes, capturing their king, and seizing their empire for his own, that protection went out the window. Finally, getting the hint that the Persians might be a problem, Nabonidus ended his 10-year residency in Tamia and hurried home to hastily prepare for the coming onslaught. When he finally arrived in or around 539 BCE, Nabonidus surprised everyone, maybe even himself, by being an energetic and competent king. He quickly ordered repairs to Babylon's walls and defenses and tried to whip a long idle army back into some semblance of fighting shape. But the people had come to loathe Belshazzar. Despite the sudden appearance of his dad, he'd enjoyed 10 years to pilfer his own people through high taxes, to indulge himself in the trappings of luxury, and generally be a frivolous and self-indulgent good-for-nothing. He lost the support of the nobility, the people, even the priests. The royal family was deeply unpopular, and the weakness of the Babylonian state made the kingdom a tempting prize for Cyrus and the Persians. If Nabonidus had a few years to set things right, maybe he could have done something useful. But his fatal flaw had been to leave the kingdom in the hands of his son, and his son was a lout. Cyrus brought his armies to Babylonia so fast that there was no stopping the onslaught. When Cyrus came, he came in force. The Persian army amassed outside the key Tigris River city of Opis. Details about the battle are sketchy, but the results are crystal clear. The Persians utterly routed the Babylonians. It's at this point that Belshazzar exits the historical record, and it is reasonable to infer that he died in the fighting. If so, he wasn't mourned either by his adversaries or by his former subjects. Following the rout at Opis, the Persian army marched to the key city of Sippar on the east bank of the Euphrates River and right on the doorstep of Babylon itself. Rather than face the Persian onslaught, the residents of the city wisely threw open its gates, and Sippar was taken without a shot. The last stop for Cyrus was the queen of cities, the jewel of the ancient world, Babylon itself. Even in a state of disrepair, Babylon was an imposing city. Giant walls, even if a bit dilapidated, can be difficult to overcome and lead to a long siege. The longer a siege goes on, the higher the chances the invaders suffer disease or low morale. A city with big walls and adequate reserves can hold out for a long time. And, lest we forget, the city sat beside the Euphrates, offering a nearly impassable barrier to a would-be invader. The Babylonians, it would seem, stood to hold out indefinitely. This idea did not appeal to Cyrus one bit. He was a man of action. Settling in for a long, slow chokehold of Babylon was not his style. So the Persians turned Babylon's greatest strength, the mighty Euphrates, into a weakness. The army put down their weapons and picked up their shovels, and they started digging, and digging, and digging. They dug deep and fast, and in short order diverted the Euphrates into an irrigation canal, lowering the level of the river to a much more manageable level. One night in October 539 BCE, the Persian army crossed the river, breached the walls, and took Babylon. Again, with no resistance and no bloodshed. A few days later, Cyrus entered the city to great pomp. Given the neglect by Nabonidus and the incompetent administration of Belshazzar, many of the Babylonians treated Cyrus like a liberator rather than a conqueror. When Nabonidus surrendered himself to Cyrus, he found himself treated with respect and courtesy. Perhaps seeing that the talent that Nabonidus flashed on his return to Babylon, Cyrus even gave Nabonidus a job, assigning him an administrative role in one of the satrapies. Nabonidus eventually died peacefully and of old age. The Babylonian Empire was dead, deposed, toppled. It was not coming back. Not this time, not ever. In fact, the end of the Neo-Babylonians marked the last time that the region was ruled by people from the area. For a long, long time, it would be subject to the whims of other foreign powers. Sometimes these rulers were good, competent, and just. Other times, more tyrannical and exploitative. Either way, the Babylonians were at the mercy of foreign powers from here on out. Moment of silence for Babylonia. After the conquest of the Neo-Babylonians in 539 BCE, Cyrus wanted to make sure his new subjects just knew who he was and what he stood for. He issued edicts to stake out his position on many important things. In these decrees, which survive in large measure thanks to a remarkable clay tablet known today as the Cyrus cylinder, Cyrus freed all of the slaves and then banished slavery. He established what today we would call freedom of religion. And remember the Judeans, the captives in Babylon taken by Nebuchadnezzar following his conquest of the kingdom of Judah? Cyrus freed them too, granting them leave to return to their country and stating that the great temple should be rebuilt, and at his expense. The Babylonian captivity had relocated 10 to 20,000 people from the shattered kingdom of Judah. Resettled in Babylonia, their community had thrived and grown and was considerably larger 2 generations later. Roughly 40 to 50,000 people began their return to Judea, bringing home word of the new Persian emperor and his magnanimity. And still, some remained. Cyrus and his successors left the door open, so to speak, allowing any Judeans to return to their homeland whenever they felt compelled to do so. For the next century, many more would pack up and head west to enjoy the freedom of self-governing rule that the Persians granted to the formerly captive people. The Cyrus cylinder was revolutionary for its time, and echoes of it can still be felt today. It is considered by many to be the foundational document of human rights, and the first 4 articles of the United Nations 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights were drawn from its contents. 2.5 millennia later, and the humanity of Cyrus was still helping serve as a moral compass. Cyrus set a tone for decency and respect that is much more closely aligned with our modern sensibilities. For example, the Persian policies also gave stronger rights and autonomy to women than any other ancient society to date. Excavations of imperial records even indicate that women were granted fair pay, equal pay, and maternity leave when working in the service of the empire. Of course, enlightened for his time though he may have been, he was still a man of his time. It's not like he gently knocked on the doors of his neighbors and asked if they wanted to join his empire, and if he said no, he apologized for the inconvenience and then just left them alone. He was, above all else, a conqueror, and a darn good one. I argue he was the greatest ever. Future people would build bigger empires, including one just an episode or two away, but few combined conquest with administration like the Achaemenid Persians. They didn't just subdue, they ruled, and they did so with a keen sense of justice, which they made available to all people under their control. Persians, Medes, Lydians, Elamites, Bactrians, Phoenicians, Babylonians. Once under Persia's dominion, they all enjoyed equal protection under the regime. It's pretty remarkable, especially for their time when you stop and think about it. These subject people certainly had obligations. That included the universal taxes and tribute. But they also had to contribute troops, cavalry, and war materiel. Given the size of the empire, the Persian army could be a polyglot of different weapons, tactics, and languages. Following the conquest of Babylon, Cyrus heeded the advice of some of his top generals, including one of his top female commanders, the talented Artunis. They conceived of an elite corps of Persian troops to ensure the king was always surrounded by the creme de la creme. The result was the 10,000-strong unit known as the Immortals, called such because should any one of them fall in battle, a reserve would immediately step into his place to keep the unit perpetually at full force. The Immortals, highly trained, deeply loyal, and decidedly deadly, were so effective that they struck fear in the imaginations of their enemies. This was not a group you wanted standing across from you on the battlefield. With his extensive empire amassed and his elite corps of troops cementing his own invincible army, Cyrus needed a title befitting such a king. He added one or two titles, little things here and there. By 539 BCE, his royal title was King of Anshan, King of Persia, King of Media, King of the world, King of kings, Great King, Mighty King, King of Babylon, King of Sumer and Akkad, King of the four corners of the world, King of the universe. That's quite a title, and it would be a lot to pass on to an eventual successor. Cyrus amped up his preparation for the next generation following the conquest of Babylonia. He appointed his eldest son, Cambyses II, to govern the vital city and province of the conquered Babylon. Cambyses had a younger brother, too, Bardia, about whom a lot of mystery and controversy surrounds. More on that to come. Not long after taking over as satrap of Babylon, the great king told his younger son to draw up battle plans for a big campaign. But who, do you ask, is left to conquer? Why, Egypt, of course. Cambyses set to planning. It was a complex endeavor, and planning took some time. There's no better way to prepare to rule than by doing so under the watchful eye of history's greatest empire builder. So in 530 BCE, Cyrus appointed his older son co-ruler, elevating Cambyses to his equal. In that same year, Cyrus began a conquest of one of the few neighboring tribes that had yet to fall under his sway. The Massagetians were a Central Asian steppe nomadic people with their own complex history. They had emerged as a power in or around the 8th century BCE, and by the time Cyrus came around, they were ruled by a queen, Tomyris, who had inherited the throne upon the death of her husband, the king. Given that she was a widow, Cyrus saw advantage in a marriage alliance, and he proposed to the queen. Understanding that acceptance of this proposal would lead to the absorption of her kingdom into his, Tomyris declined. When Cyrus first approached her kingdom, the king implored Cyrus to leave her kingdom alone and to content himself with his own massive empire. He should have listened. Not one to back away from a goal, and perhaps feeling a bit rebuffed by Tomyris' rejection of his proposal, Cyrus vowed war. This time, he bit off more than he could chew. At first, he had some successes. Among other things, Cyrus captured Tomyris' beloved son. Granting the young prince his usual clemency, the prince celebrated his freedom by committing suicide. This sent Tomyris into a rage, and she personally assumed command of the military. When the two forces met, the Persians were utterly routed. Their ferocious warrior queen exulted as the mighty Cyrus himself was cut down in battle. According to some legends, the queen had the corpse of Cyrus the Great beheaded. She then took the head and submerged it in a vessel full of blood, mocking the fallen king that now he could drink his fill of blood. It's a great story, but it's probably fabricated. The earliest source that describes this story is at least a full century after the alleged date of its occurrence. Whatever the details, in 530 BCE, Cyrus the Great died on campaign, far from home. His remains were brought back to his capital city of Pasargadae amid great mourning. His accomplishments were extraordinary. Other people had forged great empires, but no one had done anything near the scale that Cyrus had. He took all the great powers of the Near East, conquered and consolidated them into a unified entity. He also expanded west, then east, pushing the boundaries of his empire out in all directions. This east-west axis forged by Cyrus would come to have significant implications for human history. His empire and the freedoms he allowed the people within it brought a lot of formerly isolated or far-flung people in contact with one another. A Lydian and a Bactrian could meet up in Babylon and exchange ideas and cultural values. The east-west route that we now call the Silk Road became possible under Cyrus. In the next episode, we will see some steps taken by one of Cyrus's successors to advance this exchange further. Cyrus also demonstrated a level of fairness and justice that marks him out as unique for his age. His default was not to revenge or liquidation of foes, but to clemency. Rarely, if ever, did he indulge in the wholesale slaughter of enemies, so often perpetrated by contemporaneous empires and peoples such as the Medes and Assyrians. He changed the way that empires were built, and he placed a prime emphasis on fair governance, on the Zoroastrian tradition of truth-telling. His decree following the capture of Babylon still influences our thinking on human rights more than 2.5 millennia later. He was an exceptional man for his time, and I think for all time. I have no doubt that he has earned his epithet of the Great. You can still visit his tomb today. It's a bit worse for the wear after all these years, and it's doubtful that the King of Kings' remains are still there, but you can read the inscription that he left behind for us. O man, whoever you are and wherever you come from, for I know you will come. I am Cyrus, who won the Persians their empire. Do not, therefore, begrudge me this bit of earth that covers my bones. Before we go, please remember to share word about this podcast with anyone you think might be interested. Your help in spreading the word is so deeply appreciated, and I can't do it without you. Thank you for listening to this episode. I am grateful that you did. Join us on the next one, where we track the aftermath of the life and death of Cyrus the Great and get to know one of his immediate successors, a king who laid claim to be every bit as magnificent as Cyrus, Darius the Great.